And we're live. It is Wednesday, April 23rd. We have just discovered that teenagers are nihilists. It is the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. The sun is shining. The birds are chirping. The snowman is back in his role as Tonto. And it's going to be a great frickin' day because, Mr. Cactus,
You're watching Dog Short TV, an effing revolution in morning television.
you are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is an effing revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features, of which there are, as I think I've mentioned, there are a significant number.
Should.
Yeah, is that, sometimes Holly's son has an orthodontist appointment, um and therefore she has to take him to the orthodontist, being a good parent who wants her son to have teeth as straight as, the straightest teeth that e'er were seen. And so she has to jump off at 8:40, and we just roll with that. It's not, it's not like we say, no, no, but you're on set, or like, tell your son to take an Uber to the orthodontist. We don't do that because it's a revolution in morning television, and we accept that Holly is a fully formed human being who has a life, and who exists in a non-camera sense, and who has a son who needs teeth straightening. And so,
I have comments on orthodontia, but please finish.
yeah, and so we just roll with that. And another one of the revolutionary features, of which, as it is said, there are many, is that sometimes I do the show having woken up, 20 minutes earlier, and having, yeah, Holly too, and having not done Dog Shirt Daily last night because, I was entertaining a lawfare party. We had a lawfare dinner to welcome Nastia back to the city. And so I was out a little bit late, and I was going to do the thing in the morning, and I woke up and it was 7:40, and I hadn't done Dog Shirt TV, Dog Shirt Daily, and so I kind of quickly did it, scraped it together, and I have to admit, I did something cheap, which is I found on the White House Twitter, not Twitter feed, Instagram feed, a picture of J.D. Vance and the Pope. And the Pope looking like, frankly, he was being visited by the angel of death.
It does. I see that picture.
And I just ran with it because, it was 7:50 and I had to do the show, and so I want to just say it was beneath me to do that, and I don't apologize at all. On the show today,
Yeah, what is on the show today?
I have no idea. But
I can do your
we're gonna introduce it grandly. On the show today, we are going to do whatever happens because we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have a barely awake Benjamin Wittes and Holly Berkley Fletcher drinking their coffee, getting ready for the whole orthodontia thing. So what are your thoughts on, you have comments on orthodontia?
Oh, first of all, Nastia's back. I didn't know Nastia was back. How long is she here for?
2 days. She's here
okay.
because we have an event for escalation this evening at the Spy Museum, and if people want to come to it, there is a form somewhere that you should fill out an RSVP, and I think you can join digitally or you can join in person. It's kind of cool. and Tyler and Nastia are both in town for the Spy Museum event. And, so we flew her in for that, and she is sleeping in the room down the hall.
Awesome. I don't know that I will be make it because I'm doing edits for Tyler, actually.
Well,
Should have done like days ago, and I didn't.
it's okay. It's all right.
Right.
Don't worry, Holly. The situation in South Sudan will not improve.
That's true. I'm more afraid. Like what always happens is like and then
Also,
it,
I can promise
you
you,
gotta
no
think
one's going to scoop you because nobody else gives a shit about
that is
South
true.
Sudan.
That's true, and it's really I tried to frame it so that if it gets worse, which that definitely could do, it's not really dependent on what's currently. It's okay. So it'll be okay, but I do have to do those edits for him. Oh, orthodontia, yes. So this is kind of a cultural thing in America, isn't it? I mean, it's definitely a way to get your money. Which, if what I don't appreciate is if you went in there and they basically the premise was like, this is a culture of people with perfect teeth, and if you don't spend a lot of money and get perfect teeth, like people are gonna notice that your teeth are not good, and I don't know, I guess that's bad. You won't be considered attractive here in this country. You'll have to go to another country to be attractive. But instead they give you some like propaganda. Honestly, I'm sure there's some science behind it, but they make it sound like if you don't correct your teeth, like you're not gonna be able to chew in like 30 years. Like the misalignment, it's like you're not properly grinding your food, or like somehow if you're not like properly grind, your teeth aren't aligned, you're gonna swallow a piece of food that's really too big,
And
and
you're
you're
going
gonna
to
choke and
die.
die.
Yeah.
Yeah, they make it
Be visited by J.D. Vance.
yeah. So they always make it sound they have their little models and they show like, oh, the teeth are not aligned and like look how they aren't able to grind. It's like I have I don't have perfect alignment in my teeth. Um I didn't grow up here. My sister did get braces here in America, and they did have an orthodontist. They had one. Now they have several in Nairobi. But I didn't get that because my teeth weren't bad enough, I guess.
So,
And
but I think that the isn't one of the major issues about misaligned teeth headaches.
again, I have never heard, I mean, elsewhere in the world, well, okay,
Everybody walks around with headaches all the time,
is
and
that,
we don't have headaches in the
I mean, the
United
British,
States.
I have headaches, and
No, no, you don't have headaches. Well, that's because you never had orthodontia.
well, I had
See,
some
that's why you have
minor
headaches.
later.
I had orthodontia, and I've never had a headache.
Never?
No, I'm totally lying. I have headaches all the time,
Okay,
and
yeah, I was
but
gonna
but
say,
it's
like,
good that I pulled it off with enough panache
well,
that
you
you
have nice teeth, I will say that. So
actually have
I
terrible
will
teeth.
say, elsewhere in the world, like specifically Europe, actually. Okay, so here's a weird thing. There's very little orthodontia in Africa, and yet I don't know what the statistics are on this, but I can't tell you how many Africans I know who grew up, like ordinary people, not with money, and have like astoundingly perfect teeth. There's some, I don't know. And then you go to Britain, which
Because
is
there's
where
no
I,
fluoride in the water. It's
well, there's that,
the fluoride is it undoes the orthodonture that you would have done had you lived in a society with orthodonture.
I didn't know fluoride could like rearrange teeth,
It's
but
That's what it does.
oh, I
It
see.
moves your
Well,
teeth
then how
around
do we all have to still spin on orthodontia? Anyway,
because we have fluoride, so it knocks our teeth out of the way, and then you have to put them back with orthodontia. But if you live in a country plus we all don't have headaches as a result of the orthodontia, but if you live in a country in which there is no fluoride in the water, the teeth don't get knocked out of the way in the first place, and so you don't need the orthodontia, but you have headaches.
Honestly, this all makes as much sense as the bullshit they give you at the orthodontist.
Yeah. Well, look, you brought up the subject. I'm just justifying the status quo because that's what I do.
Anyway, Europeans have, especially and I am of British descent, almost 100%. And I have to say that there's a lot of bad teeth in Britain, and I think it's a result of like a weak jaw. Like there's just not a lot of enough room in there, which I also have the British weak jaw. And I feel like that's some evolutionary thing. My theory is that um British skulls evolved. It put more room in the brain area to accommodate the very large intelligent brain that we have. And so our jaws are weak and our teeth are.
So we're getting
We're getting into eugenics
we're
now.
getting into cranial
Yeah,
capacity and
that's right.
yeah, okay, good.
We're
Good.
getting into
Do you
eugenics.
do you have a pair of calipers?
I don't. But anyway, yeah, I'm not, just to be clear, that was a joke. I'm not a eugenicist.
No, it's not.
Thomas apparently is, because you've heard his theory about skull size and C-sections.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, look, there is a really um, real problem with, as the human brain gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it gets harder and harder and harder to have your head up your ass. And so,
and yet so many people do.
and well, but they're the previous stage of
Perfect.
human evolution. As we get more intelligent, as Holly, as we improve the race, it will be harder and harder to have people with their heads permanently planted up their asses. All right.
Okay,
What
that was enough of that.
it really was. What is on your mind this morning?
Oh, first of all, I just also have to show off my friend Tammy, who was here dog sitting. She has gotten really into the sign making, and she made this,
Wow.
which I think is very good.
Yeah.
And the other
I
side, she has my favorite Swahili word, which she misspelled it, but it's only because I've also frequently misspell it.
Shagalabagala.
No, shagalabagala.
Shagalabagala.
Shagalabagala means like a cluster F.
Like a goat rodeo.
Oh yeah. Yes, a goat rodeo. Yes.
In fact, maybe goat rodeo is just shagalabagala in English.
I think it is actually. So anyway, and other than that, like I don't have a whole lot going on. I wrote a post last night that I think is quite good, so you can go read that.
All right. I will. What's it about?
Well, it's about just the experience last week of, I found it very jarring to be touring all these historical sites and reflecting on America's, inspiring. In this particular case, it was the inspiring bits, the American Revolution and the Constitution and all of these things. And also thinking about my daughter's future and touring all these colleges, juxtaposed with particularly that week. It started on Monday with that Berkeley visit, which just really, I don't know. I don't know if this is true of just me, or there's all of the sort of chaos and crap that goes on like a daily basis, but then every now and then something happens, or there's like a story that breaks, or they do something in particular that just like wrecks me. The whole USA thing really wrecked me. The Zelensky, obviously the Zelensky visit, and this Bukele thing just wrecked me. So anyway, it's about that. But then I also had read Navalny's "Sorry for the Ukrainians Who Hate Him" memoir at the same time, and then it reminded me too of back in 2016, this Zimbabwean pastor who started this whole movement trying to reclaim the Zimbabwean flag, and then it ended up the flag became a the protesters used it as a rally. They actually were really smart. I think we could learn something from this flag movement in Zimbabwe, because they basically forced the government into a crazy situation where they were arresting people for patriotism, for going down the road holding flags and singing the national anthem. That's all they were doing, and they were like arresting them for that. And then the same movement, they did stayaways instead of protests. They did stay homes. And so again, it was very bewildering for the Zimbabwean government, because how do you arrest people just for staying home? But it was actually a really effective. Anyway, so I told his story, which is I like to tell stories from Africa, because people don't know a lot about Africa, but also because there's a lot of inspiring people there who are fighting in very improbable circumstances.
And who are very creative about it.
Yeah.
I think those of us who are interested in creative protests and figuring out, and by the way, to everybody out there who has approached me uh, about various creative protest ideas, good on you. Keep up the dialogue, both with me and among yourselves. Um, some of these ideas, and if you're one of the people I'm talking to, you know who you are really fun and interesting. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
about that. Speaking of which, um, the we should I think you should project on maybe the Salvadoran embassy. I don't know what kind of building they have.
well, so the Salvadoran embassy is tiny,
Oh,
and it would be um, a rather easy target, and it would be fun to do, and I may do it.
I think
Um,
that would be really
it
awesome.
would be, it's kind of like Lord Laser is like, it, it's not a fair fight between it and the Salvadoran embassy, but kind of like, uh, but there are some operational reasons why it may be a slightly problematic little target. But I'm thinking about it. So um, yeah. So for those of you who are following in the Greek chorus, I just asked Lior to come on and talk about what's going on in the Netanyahu trial, which he follows very closely. He is currently he unavailable, as you'll see, but he does think we should talk about everything that's happening in Israel. And so let's figure out a day when or a time when he can do that, because he follows this stuff very closely, and some dramatic events in in the Netanyahu case. Netanyahu tried to fire the head of the Shin Bet, which is the domestic security service, because, and this will sound very 2017 to a lot of people, he would not pledge personal loyalty to Netanyahu. Uh, um, and uh, he ended up, uh, there's an injunction against his removal, and he ended up testifying about it. Um, so interesting parallels going on, both with the Trumpy past and with the, unfortunately, I think, Trumpy future in Israel. And we will try to have a conversation about that as soon as we can. Nastia is now awake and
Oh,
giving me the thumbs up from the kitchen. Here she is. Maybe she's
you're
going to
gonna
stick
come
her
on?
head in there. Wait.
Hey, Nastia.
Hi.
Well, anyway, I don't know if I'll see her this time, but I'll catch her next time. So,
Um, all right. what else is on your mind or anybody in the Greek chorus's
Oh,
mind today?
I did want to say something about the Pope and actually South Sudan. The Pope was actually very involved in the whole. He was one of the very few people in the world that gave a shit about South Sudan, actually.
Well, good for him.
Well, yeah. So, so the erstwhile dictator of South Sudan, Salva Kiir, is a fervent Catholic. You know, as one is when one is also causing the deaths of millions of your people and pilfering all of its, oil money. It helps to be a Catholic. And I always wonder these hyper religious, which in Africa, like Mugabe, again, very, very religious. I grew up under President Daniel Arap Moi, who was very religious, evangelical Christian. Um, these I feel like now we're, of course, we have our own sort of court Christians in the White House, but it just fascinates me these like super religious people who then, like, what does your confession look like if you're Salva Kiir? Like what is it?
So,
Or do you do that? Like, do you? I think they think, and looking at evangelicals here, the ends justify the means. So they tell themselves that the horrible things they're doing are necessary to achieve some end. And I think Salva Kiir thinks that the country of South Sudan just, I guess, I don't see how it could crumble more than it already has. But I guess in his mind, like it will somehow cease to exist without him. So maybe that's how he thinks about it. But I would love to be in Salva Kiir's like confessional. I think that would be entertaining.
it's a really, first of all, I will say in defense of murderous religiosity,
In defense,
yes,
I love it.
that the two most murderous movements of the 20th century were both atheistic. Um, and so there is, for, it's not clear to me that the problem is murderous religiosity as opposed to murderous ideology of one sort or another.
Which
Um,
is a kind of ideology, I think. So
right, but right, religion is a subset of ideological belief, and when you have particularly fervent ideological beliefs, whether you're Torquemada or Hitler or Stalin or Mao, the bodies rack up, and so it's never like whether there's a uniquely religious form of violence. That is an interesting question to me that I've never entirely resolved in my own mind. Um,
yeah, I think it's a framework. Again, it's if you um if you basically have a closed belief system about the world and what it should be, and you're convinced of your rightness, and your belief system basically involves forcibly instituting that in terms of some policy. That's very dangerous. That's very
right.
dangerous. So, in religion is one, of course, Christian history is the Crusades, and then of course you in more modern times with Islamic radicalism and terrorism and things like that. So there's plenty of examples, but yeah, Nazism, communism, those are just ideologies, but it's the same sort of mindset.
Well, I mean, it is the same mindset, except that, right, there is something very special about murder in the name of divine morality, which includes all kinds of things like gentleness and loving your neighbor, and there's you know, you can the Nazis were admirably candid about the fact that their ideology was murderous. We're going to trample on our enemies. We're going to create Lebensraum for the German people. All right. I mean, Slavs are subhuman. We're going to subjugate them. Jews, we're going to annihilate them. Right. They weren't. They weren't speaking in the name of any morality except for their own dominance. The communists are a little bit more complicated because they were speaking in the name of some universalism, and that has a Christian overtone, right? Like, is the revolution is something like the second coming, right? They're thinking about a messianic era. On the other hand, it's an explicitly revolutionary movement that contemplates quite a lot of violence by way of one class displacing another class in order to get to that that place. But Christianity by its terms doesn't contemplate violence to get to where it.
Well, and there's not really an articulated earthly goal in terms of like a system that you create. It's
Right.
a
It's
ethic.
it's all about individual goodness and and piety. And
And
so
community. I mean, there's a lot of talk of justice and standing up for the oppressed and things like that, but it's definitely not, the goal was never like building, well, because I think a lot of these movements, to achieve their goals, they have to have power, and they have to wield power really in an authoritarian way. But even if you have just things that fit with a democratic world order, like to achieve a policy or like a sort of, you have to have power. And I don't, and Jesus teaching there's no goal of power at all. So
right. And of course, it's Christian power is really a fourth century phenomenon, right? And the early church, the whole ethos of the church is a out of power oppressed movement
right.
that then acquires power and acquires power through the force of Roman institutions,
Yeah.
and so it's quite different from Islam, where it starts with conquest, right? Its source of legitimacy is we took back Mecca and Medina, we purged the Kaaba of polytheism, and then we went on a I'm using this word in the technical sense, a jihad, and liberated and converted large numbers of people, right? It starts with power. Christianity doesn't start with power. It doesn't start with conquest. It starts with oppression. It's the founding myth is crucifixion and redemption, and how how you convert that into an ideology that justifies mass forcible conversion and a lot of killing is an interesting thing. There's just not that much in the sacred text. I mean, even Judaism has a lot more to work with in that regard, right?
Well,
Because
we do have Christianity share what we call the Old Testament. I realize you don't call the Old Testament. And the old,
although there are great jokes about that.
oh, really?
Oh yeah.
The Old Testament and the New Testament?
Well, so an ultra Orthodox Jew is walking down the street, and a evangelical hands him a copy of the New Testament and says, would you like a New Testament? He said, no, thank you. I have an old one.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
That's actually I tell that as a joke, but I literally know the person who it happened to. It's actually a true story.
I believe that. I believe that. Where there are evangelicals, there are bad cringe, people doing cringy things, handing out things. Um, so I will say, like, one of the big growing up, and one of the things that Christians, who actually read the Bible and are somewhat serious about their faith, one thing they grapple with is and inerrantists have a particularly hard time because they don't really give any credence to sort of historical context of when the scripture was written, or sort of, they think it's like, perfect as written for all time and has meaning for all time, and so you have to make all the pieces fit. But there's a lot of discussion about the jarring disparity between the sort of God of the Old Testament and the God of Jesus and the Gospels, because the Old Testament has some real brutality in it. I mean, God, at one point, the verse that's often wrestled with in Christian circles is, I forget what book it is or the context, but God basically orders a genocide. I mean, killing of men, women, and children.
Amalek,
Oh, okay. Yeah,
the tribe of Amalek.
that's
And,
right.
and
What
by
book is it?
what's
What
that?
what book
I
is it?
believe it's in Exodus.
Okay.
They attack the um, the Hebrews from behind, and that is so un um, un
And cool.
yeah, it's that God commands their annihilation, and it's actually more powerful. Even it's not just kill them all; it's you can't loot from them. And by the way, there's a idea in Jewish mythology that the spirit of Amalek um, persists and it infects other peoples. And that is why there is, or that's the idea that Amalek, exists in every generation. And that idea is used to justify some pretty awful stuff, because you label somebody Amalek and it becomes kind of not merely okay to kill them, but kind of divinely commanded to kill them.
Yeah. So, how do Jews, grapple with that? Given they have also been the target of genocidal intents. How do Jews sort of interpret that? Like
Well,
reasonable Jews.
so so first of all, Judaism does not have the theological problem that Christianity does of being a universal religion. Uh, and so the idea that there are um, that oh, okay, so I am wrong about the
Deuteronomy.
it's
Uh-huh.
in Deuteronomy, and it is they attack the city of David according to Leor. So Judaism just doesn't have the problem of needing to be a um, uh, it doesn't have to speak to everybody, and it doesn't try. And so the idea that there are tribal obligations um, uh, to that apply to Jews that don't apply to other people is sort of foundational, right? The law is the law for Jews. Hello, Jonathan Rauch. Uh,
He's
di-
an answer.
Directed at Jews, not directed at other people. And so that's the first thing. That just doesn't cause Jews cognitive dissonance in the way that it would Christians. Because Judaism is just not a universalist religion. It's a tribal religion. Um, Now, why that fact does not cause Jews cognitive dissonance is an interesting question, but it hasn't over the years. Partly because Christians and Muslims have been so good at reinforcing Jewish tribalism by keeping them in relatively isolated communities and occasionally murdering them. And so the sense of, hey, we only got each other. There's a morality in, our morality is for us, is pretty well, like, that's just a feature of Judaism. And it's one of the reasons Judaism is small.
And less annoying.
Well, it could be make it more annoying if you're, say, an Amalekite. But
Fair.
the I think there is a struggle in Judaism among moderns between universalism and tribalism, and it is typically resolved with reference to a kind of distance and horizon. You know, look, Holly's lucky she's not, we have all these obligations. She's fine. She worships God. She doesn't eat meat off live animals. She doesn't, that's one of the Noahide laws, she doesn't, murder people. She's got no problem. So what's, why are you feeling bad for Holly?
Jonathan Rauch.
What's on your mind this morning, Mr. Rauch?
I just thought I'd pop in and see how everyone's doing.
We're so glad you did because I'm going to have to leave. And so you can entertain Ben while I go to the orthodontist with my son. So,
Orthodontist, is it for you or for your son?
oh no, for the child. The children, they have to have perfect teeth. Yeah, we went through this earlier in the show, just the horrible things that happen if you don't have perfect teeth. So,
Well, I had orthodontia in my mid and late 20s. So, get it?
well, now you can chew properly, apparently. And I
Apparent-
don't know how you ate before that, but anyway.
Well, you're saving possibly your son much surus, as we Jews call it, later in life. So get it done when they're young.
That's what we're doing. So anyway, I'm
Okay.
actually going to go ahead and
So
go.
wait, I have more information about Amalekites before you go,
Okay,
Holly.
okay.
So I was right, and Lior and Richard Wattenbarger are right. In Exodus 17, 8-16, during the Exodus, the Amalekites ambush the Israelites encamped at Rephidim, but are defeated. And Moses orders Joshua to lead the Israelites into battle while Moses, Aaron, and Hur watch from a nearby hill. When Moses' hands holding his staff are raised, the Israelites prevail. But when his hands are lowered, the Israelites falter. He sits with his hands held up by Aaron and Hur until sunset, securing the Israelite victory.
Quite an upper body.
Yeah, that's a feat. Okay, but then in Deuteronomy 17-19, the Israelites are specifically commanded to blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven once they have taken possession of the promised land, in retribution for what Amalek did to them on the way as they were coming out of Egypt, a reference to the ambush at Rephidim. Earlier in Deuteronomy 17, 1-16, and Deuteronomy 25, 16-18, they are commanded to utterly destroy all inhabitants of the idolatrous cities in the promised land and their livestock. Scripture purports that King Saul ultimately loses favor with God for failing to kill Agag and the best livestock of the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15 in defiance of those commandments. So killing Amalek does have it does have its roots in an attack on the way out of Egypt in Exodus, but the commandment to destroy them from under the face of heaven is in Deuteronomy. So thank you to all in the Greek chorus who contributed to that. And thank you to the Wikipedia entry on Amalek, which is, this is why we have an internet. None of this meme shit. It's for when you are live streaming and you are, you know, you make a reference to the Amalekites and you just don't have the knowledge of Exodus and Deuteronomy in your head to support it because you're not a yeshiva kid. This is what, uh,
Well, very fascinating.
and as Lior points out in the chat very correctly, knowing something about Amalek is worthwhile because the extreme right and even some of the not so extreme right in Israel use Amalek as a excuse or a theological justification for some of their more genocidal impulses with respect to Palestinians.
Well, I'm going to have to go, but I will be interested in Jonathan
May
Rauch's
your
thoughts later
son's
in the
teeth
podcast.
be as straight as the
Sparkle like the sun.
as the evangelicals imagine that they can convert gay kids to be.
Yes.
In fact, we should think of orthodontia as a kind of um, uh, gay reparative therapy for teeth.
Or a way to avoid years of expensive, um, what's the word for gum disease?
Yeah,
Periodontal work.
right. And headaches. I think the reason Americans don't have headaches and the rest of the world is, you know, suffering from an epidemic of headaches is that we all had orthodontia and they didn't.
Well, I'm just here to see who else is here and listen in.
Well, no, you're now the guest.
Who knew?
Because you showed up just at the moment when Holly had to go and we were finishing up a conversation about Amalek. And so the show is entirely on your shoulders now, Jonathan. What's on your mind?
Oh, just everything. You know, the collapse of the entire liberal order in the United States that constitutes everything that I thought I knew and grew up with. Other than that, I'm fine.
Yeah, it really does have a, you know, other than that, the play sucked quality to it. Um, but let's talk about the collapsing liberal order and what we can do about it. Because, you know, I do believe that most problems in the world have at least a partial solution that involves a laser projection. But I'm curious what you think, and I've been approached, as I mentioned earlier, by a number of people who are contemplating, shall we say, creative protest activities, which I want to encourage. Stay on the right side of the law, people, or be prepared to, you know, pay the price of your civil disobedience. But some of these are very good ideas, and so I'm interested in what you're thinking about as like, what is the traffic that you're going to lie down in front of?
Well, I haven't mobilized myself yet for public protest, but I will. I plan to. Like, I think you may have mentioned in an earlier conversation, perhaps like you, I'm trained as a journalist, and so I have a deep identitarian commitment to
It's
not
really
showing up
hard
for
to shake
things.
that. It took me that is a psychological barrier that I had a lot of trouble with.
It's an identity issue for me. I've always been able to say that I don't tell my vote and I don't show up at protests and I don't give money to candidates. And of course, life has changed a great deal. Uh, but I think I will. I think it's time to break that barrier. I think the protests are meaningful. I think now that the courts are beginning to throw some sand in the gears, that's cheered me up a bit, though I don't know how sustainable it is. Um, I'd be curious for your take on that. And the Trump administration seems to have slowed down a bit and seems to be in that all-purpose word that journalists love, disarray. So that didn't take long. Of course, that was completely predictable. Nonetheless, they continue to, you know, use the tools of government to extort universities and law firms, throw people in jail and send them to foreign dungeons on apparently completely fabricated charges, ignore and display contempt for judges, the Constitution, and the Congress, and, a few other things. Cruel, reckless, and sophomoric rhetoric from the Oval Office, the abandonment of allies, alliances, the reshaping of the world order, with the US apparently more on the side of Russia than it is on the side of our own allies, the potential collapse of the dollar as the world's reserve currency, the end of the global trading order that took 80 years to build and brought unprecedented prosperity. A few other things like that. It does, after a while, wear you down a little bit.
Yeah, I think the one of the important disciplines is never to articulate a list like that. Um, uh, because, you know, there are some things you can do or contributions you can make about any individual component of the list. But when you make the whole list, the throwing yourself in front of a train option really does become like very alive, and I think it gets overwhelming really fast, and I think uh the discipline is not to do that, not, kind of not to put yourself in the position where you're intellectually overwhelmed or emotionally overwhelmed by it, which is not to say we shouldn't acknowledge that it's happening, we shouldn't be candid about it, but you know but not like trying to face it all at once is too much, so don't do it. Do it one day. Holly likes to say every day do one thing that matters, and it can be small. And I think that's the discipline, and it's partly a discipline to keep ourselves involved, but it's also partly a discipline to keep ourselves emotionally healthy.
I think that's got to be right at at some level. The thing I'm thinking about at the moment for a future article is, which I hope to get to quite soon, is understanding the psychological warfare elements of what they're doing. My view of this administration and Trump generally is that, say whatever you like about their competence as administrators and lawyers, um, and thinkers and economists, they are extremely good at psychological warfare. And they have been from day one. The manipulating mass psychology is what Donald Trump has always been exceptional at. And his own psychopathy and ruthlessness continues, um, contributes to that. And something very important to understand is how people in countries in which the state is making psychological warfare against the population, state terror, as Timothy Snyder calls it, but specifically psychological warfare, the onslaught of daily efforts to make people feel futile and defeated and endangered and fearful. So I want to know how people resist that, because there must be a whole literature on this regime, on this phenomenon from regimes in, Eastern Europe. And so I want to call Thomas Elvis, for example, and I want to call maybe Gary Kasparov. I'm going to get a list of names and say, how do you push back against what are, in fact, very effective techniques of psychological warfare? Now, I've mentioned this to you at one point, and you basically said, well, just cheer up and be happy. But that's not an inadequate response. That's like, well, you're being waterboarded, try not to mind.
But I do believe that also about being waterboarded. And you know, um, I think I mentioned to you, God, we're so deep in Jewish texts today. But um, my favorite part of the of all of Jewish liturgy is the martyrology service on Yom Kippur, where it describes the mortification of the flesh of the rabbis and the flaying by the Romans of Rabbi Akiva and his accepting it joyously. I think there is, and this, of course, this attitude sounds in Stoicism as well, although the Stoics are less joyous about it. But you can do what you want to me, but you can't affect my consciousness to the extent I don't let you. I think that's a really important discipline. And, I have never felt so politically powerful as when I was approached by cops while projecting in a country where it was not necessarily legal. And they were really angry at me. And I just went like this, held out my hands for them to cuff. And they weren't, to be fair, they weren't proposing to flay my skin off my chest with an iron comb. But I don't know that I would have the discipline to be joyous about that. But I felt great at that moment. Thank you, Belgian police officers, who backed down immediately. By the way, when I did that, and so I really actually stand by the. I don't mean learn to enjoy, the oppression of liberalism. I mean, learn to enjoy the life of resisting it. Be cheerful, be of good cheer, and we have a mission, and we should do it with smiles on our faces.
Well, not entirely disagreeing, but my last book, well, I guess not last, but one, excuse me, it's early in the morning, Constitution of Knowledge, was largely about the effectiveness of cognitive warfare techniques. They are tried and true. They often work despite best efforts of individuals to resist them. And they work at the group and social level, not merely the individual level. That's part of why they're clever. They're contagious, for example. So my counter proposition would be that individual stoicism is great up to a point, but it takes years to cultivate and to learn those habits. Americans are not in that habit. So we're going to have to find out how groups create psychological barriers and countermeasures. And then we're going to have to do those things.
So, look, I agree with that. And I also think part of the project of resistance with joy is a project in teaching people to do that and to be to not be to just make a cognitive decision not to be afraid. And I actually think that is at some level a cognitive decision, and it's harder for some people than for others, both because individual psychology varies and frankly because individual circumstances vary. But I do think it is an important part of the project, just making a decision. When did the Euromaidan happen? It happened when some number of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians decided, all right, we're just not going to be afraid of this shit anymore. And there's some moment when that clicks for enough people that, you have spontaneous mass movements, and that's what we're going for.
I just put something in the chat which got my attention. A woman I know that we both know, I think, actually, Emma Adams of Mormon Women for Ethical Government, is involved in this. And it struck me as the right kind of thing. So have you seen this, the quilt?
I have seen the quilt, yes, and I've also seen her talk about the quilt.
So for
But
those,
describe it for those who have not.
well, I don't know all that much about it, but according to the website here, and Emma, this is a movement started by the aforementioned Mormon Women for Ethical Government, in which they're inviting women all over the country to participate in quilting events where they will write messages to congressional leaders on fabric squares, and these squares will be sewn into quilts and delivered to leaders in an effort to amplify our call for leaders in all branches of government to uphold the Constitution. And this apparently began with Latter-day Saints, but has now spread well beyond that and become national. And the reason I mentioned it is it just strikes me as the right kind of grassroots energy to keep morale up in the face of what's happening.
Yes. Look, and I think that's the most important part. Protests have two functions. They have the function of sending messages externally, but they also have the function of keeping one's own morale up and getting other people involved. And I think you know, a lot of people face the same one or another identitarian psychological barrier. There's the one that you and I faced, or in your case, currently face, which is that we just don't think of ourselves as political people. We don't go to protests. And then, for me, the Rubicon was, you know, the Russian invasion. And I drove by that building one too many times thinking somebody needs to project on it. And the estimable Matteo Carrabba sent me a direct message on Twitter that said, I think I've figured out how to do it. And I had to ask myself the question, okay, he's figured out how to do it. I think it should be done and have said so, and no one's doing it, but everybody seems to think it's a great idea. Am I the sort of person who declines to do that because I have some vision of myself as a journalist? Or am I the sort of person who says fuck it and just does it? And I kind of decided that I was the latter. Um, um, every time you get involved in a protest, it sparks discussions like this, and somebody else gets involved, right? And so there is a real internal morale boosting and also organizing component, that you get more and more people crossing a line that says okay. And some for most people it's not that journalistic identitarian line. It's I have other things to do, or I'm a Republican, right? Whatever the reason is. I'm not spitting on any of them. They're good reasons, but they are barriers, and the more people cross them, the more other people cross them.
Well, the good thing about something like quilting is it's tangible, it's scalable. You could do a lot of this and you could send a real message.
Yes.
Allows people to feel involved. So I'm impressed by that, but I'm starting to think that all the best ideas will have to come from the bottom up. They'll have to
Well,
be.
and an absurd number of them come from Mormon Women for Ethical Government. I mean, for those of you who've never dealt with that group, Emma, who runs it, is astonishing, and they are one of the most impressive civil society ground up organizational efforts I've ever seen in the democracy space. I think check them out. They're really fabulous, and you don't have to be a Mormon woman to be involved with them, though they all are. Um, any last thoughts before we wrap for the morning?
Only that I'm glad to give Emma a plug, uh, and that I am glad to be here and among friends. That in itself is helpful, and I'm seeing signs of life. I'm seeing the juggernaut slow down. I think a lot of this, I think the key element is the psychological warfare element. The administration has attempted to project imperviousness, um, and make us feel resistance is futile, and they're now beginning to stall in that effort, partly thanks to the courts, partly thanks to people like Emma and the folks on this show. And I think actually that will continue, and the more that their facade of inevitability and inviolability begins to crack, the more toxic and feeble they'll become.
I think that's exactly right. And of course, the feeble part is attractive, and the toxic part is dangerous. For those who suggested on the chat, having Emma on the show is a great idea, and I will send her a note. I did their show. They have a Instagram live show, and I will invite her, and maybe Jonathan will co-host when we do. All right, we are out of time. Thank you to Jonathan. Thank you to Holly. Thank you to the cactus, who performs his daily duties for the show with continued aplomb, and again is not confirming or denying that it was he, not J.D. Vance, who finished off Pope Francis. The picture that I posted on Dogshirt Daily today, I think, conclusively shows that J.D. Vance is the angel of death. I will point out that that picture was taken from the White House Instagram feed. That is their picture of J.D. Vance meeting with the Pope hours before he responded to that meeting as any rational person would. We're going to be back tomorrow. I have no idea who the host is going to be. I have no idea who the guest is going to be, but you'll be there, and I'll see you then.